Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined today by Pat Fitzmaurice and by Andrew Erickson. It is our Thursday show. We are talking some starts. We are talking some sits. We are talking some, are we starting or sitting these waiver wire guys? We're going through some player debates. It is week 4, almost, full month into the season. It always goes really quickly. Fitz, how you feeling today?
Feeling pretty good. There is so little rest for the wicked when the fantasy football season gets going. You end the Monday night game, or games in this case, and less than 72 hours later, you're into the next week. There's just not much time to lick your wounds if you're coming off a loss, not too much time to gloat over the wins. Quick turnaround.
It really is. It's one of my favorite parts of the season. It's kind of how regimented and quick it is, but you are right. When you're trying to prepare for shows and get rankings done, it does move very fast and seemingly faster every year. Erickson, how you feeling heading into week 4?
Feeling excited. Maybe we'll get some points this week. I know Monday night, that saved us essentially because we didn't get any points in any other games. So Monday night saved us. So shout out to those great defenses, Bengals, Commanders. Gotta love those Jaguars, of course. So hopefully we get some more bad defensive performance and we can get some points going. We need fantasy points. Again, it's not just your team that's scoring less fantasy points. It's all the teams that are scoring less points.
Remember, today we're talking starts, sits, waiver ads. We're talking some touchdown calls at the end of the show as well. We'll see if we can do better than we have been the last couple of weeks. As a reminder, all of our 2024 weekly rankings, consensus rankings, and tiers can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. Guys, let's start off with the waiver wire ads. Are we starting or sitting these guys in week 4? The most obvious one of all time, Jauan Jennings, was clearly incredible. I think I saw a stat that on Yahoo's platform, something like 80% of teams that started Jennings won their week this week. He was not completely rostered everywhere, so that number clearly went up after what we just saw. 3 touchdowns, huge game for the Niners. Fitz, are you going back to the well if you started Jennings last week, or are you kind of looking at that as a bit of a one-off? You want to have him on your team, but you're going to maybe bench him this week.
I am taking my bucket and ladle and going back to the well with Jauan Jennings. There's this cavernous rankings gap in ECR right now between Brandon Ayuk and Jauan Jennings. Ayuk is wide receiver 11, Jennings wide receiver 29. I don't think the gap should be that big. I've got Ayuk wide receiver 14, Jennings wide receiver 23. So yeah, I'm starting Jennings this week. He's just a good football player. Like, he blocks his tail off. He's stepped up as a pass catcher whenever the 49ers have needed him. Also, Jauan Jennings was in training camp, so he was ready when the curtain came up on the new season. Whereas, who wasn't in training camp? Brandon Ayuk. And it's hard for these guys to just flip the switch on when the season starts if you don't have that work under your belt. Maybe this is the week where Brandon Ayuk is the target hog. But really, that's kind of never been the receiver he's been. He's averaged last year 6.6 targets a game, even though he had a 1,300-yard season. So don't be surprised if Jennings continues to play a substantial role for the 49ers.
Yeah, Erickson, when looking at these two guys, I mean, Ayuk was, he did have 10 targets. Jennings, of course, had 12. Jennings finished with 11 catches, 175 yards, and those 3 touchdowns. I mentioned Ayuk was just at 5 catches, 48 yards, obviously no touchdowns. Are you, same question, are you going back to the well with Jennings, or are you thinking this might be more of an Ayuk game, or, are you happily starting both?
I think I'm happily starting both players because rewatching that game, they wanted to feature Ayuk. And like you said, he had a lot of opportunities to produce, but he just didn't play as well as Jennings did. And Brock Purdy figured that out real quick. Well, hey, why don't I just throw the ball to Jennings? Because every time he touches it, he's ripping off a big player scoring a touchdown. So, and when you look at the specific matchup, right? Playing the New England Patriots at home, heavy favorites, Christian Gonzalez, emerging cornerback. Who's he going to guard? Brandon Ayuk. That's who the Patriots are going to put on. Is it going to be Brandon Ayuk? So what does that create? More opportunities for Jennings as the number 2 receiver in the 49ers offense to just continue to see a ton of targets. Look at the last 2 weeks. Who's been a monster against the Patriots defense? JSN. He was wide receiver 12 in week 2 against the Patriots. Last week against the Jets, Tyler Conklin had almost 100 receiving yards, again, as that number 2 option in the passing game. So I think that the Patriots are going to send more at Brandon Ayuk. And I think that means Jennings is going to see more opportunities. Maybe we should need to kind of zoom out and think, well, if it was just Deebo Samuel instead of Jauan Jennings, well, Deebo Samuel would be ranked as a top 15 receiver coming off a 3-touchdown game. I know that they're not the same player, but they're playing a similar role, right? So I think that Jennings, he should be inside the top 24 and someone that I really don't think twice about starting. If it's Jennings or, hey, another boomer bust wide receiver here, just give me Jennings, the guy that's going to boom probably another week.
The other waiver wire guy that I wanted to highlight, and he's been like kind of a waiver wire option for a couple of weeks now. I think this was kind of the biggest week for it coming off week 3, and that's Bucky Irving in the Bucks backfield. You look at just what they did in week 3 against the Broncos. Rachaad White, 6 carries, 17 yards. Bucky Irving, 9 carries, 70 yards. So that obviously looks a lot better. He's looked, to my eyes, like the better rusher for most of the season so far anyways. Fitz, what are you doing with Bucky Irving? A guy that we talked about a lot on the Dynasty Show in the offseason, and maybe weren't like over the moon about this year given some of the testing and everything, but he's looked like the better option in that backfield.
Yeah, the testing thing, maybe he's the new Kyron Williams, a guy who just didn't test well and plays much better than he tests. I am right now not quite considering Bucky Irving flex worthy in a typical 12-team league with like 18-player rosters. But next week when the buys kick in, I think he probably moves into flex-worthy territory. He only had 18 snaps last week. I know they're talking about giving him more, and they do give him the ball when he is on the field. Like I think he has touched the ball on 54, 55% of his snaps so far this season, and Liam Cohen is talking about giving him more usage. 9 carries on his 18 snaps, 7 routes run, and 3 targets last week. So he's involved. I just want to see that snap count start ticking up closer to 25, 30 before I feel good putting him in my lineup.
And Erickson, Irving is going up against Philly's run defense that did just hold Kamara to 3.3 yards per attempt in week 3, and Kamara had been playing very well. What do you make of Irving as a start this week?
I think it's important to remember how we score fantasy points, right? You score fantasy points with touchdowns and receptions, and rushing yardage in particular isn't a ton all the time. So if that's Bucky Irving's only path to scoring fantasy points, he has to get 100 rushing yards. That's tough. Even though I think that the matchup against the Eagles are a defense where they don't look to stack the box. They have light fronts. And I think they'll probably take, because the Buccaneers traditionally never been able to run the football, I think they'll be more than happy to be, hey, fine, try to run the football on us. So I think that you might see that from this defense, specifically in this matchup. Even with the Saints last week, you cited Kamara's poor yards per carry, but Kamara got a lot of volume. I was actually surprised how often the Saints just kept continuing to run the football because it was light boxes, right? They were getting solid fronts. So I think Irving would be the carry leader in this particular matchup, but I do have question marks about, well, if they trail in this game, is Rachaad White catching passes or is it Bucky Irving? So that's kind of a strike against Irving. And then to get near the goal line, who's in? Last week it was Rachaad White. Does that change? I'm not entirely sure. And the one place where the Eagles run defense is at its best is actually in the red zone. So again, it's like 2 strikes against the pass catching and red zone usage, whereas you have 1 with rushing. Maybe in a standard league, I feel better about Irving, but in full PPR, I think you can probably find better options this week. But again, someone that you want to keep an eye on the usage heading into next week, especially with the buys coming up.
Let's move into our section where we want to plant our flag on some players. Each guy is going to pick one, sort of their guy for the week that they are really kind of going all in on with the rankings or just where they're starting them, and somebody that they really believe in for week 4. Fitz, who's your guy this week?
Khalil Shakir against your Baltimore Ravens for him. Khalil Shakir is the number 1 receiver for Josh Allen, one of the best quarterbacks in the game. Shakir only has 14 targets this season, but no other Bills wide receiver has more than 7. That target count would certainly be higher if not for the fact that the Bills have won games by 21 and 37 points this season. They just haven't needed to throw that much in a couple of their games. Shakir has caught all 14 of his targets, 168 yards and 2 touchdowns. He now has 4 touchdowns in his last 5 games, dating back to last year's playoffs. Not an easy matchup against Marlon Humphrey this week, but Shakir's a baller, man.
That week 1 game was the only time he hasn't led the team in targets so far this season. So the last 2 weeks, again, like to your point, it hasn't been these eye-popping numbers, but he has been atop of this receiving, room. And he's a player that a lot of folks really liked and have wanted to see get more opportunity. And maybe there's even still more meat on that bone in terms of the opportunity that could come. But he certainly looks really good with what he's had. Erickson, what do you make of Shakir this week?
He's delivering with every opportunity that he gets. been super efficient. He's been the most reliable target for Buffalo dating back to last year, right? When we were citing this guy is outproducing Stefon Diggs in the second half of the season, and that's carried over into the first half or the beginning of this season. So I see no reason to get away from Khalil Shakir, especially when Josh Allen is playing an MVP level and is his starting quarterback, and it's playing in a game that, I don't know about you, Warren, but I'm expecting fireworks between the Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. So I think that this is a great spot to plant Shakir. So I'm co-signing on Fitz's flag.
I do think too that Shakir, it's a good matchup for him specifically in the way they like to use him versus the weakness spots in the Ravens defense. I think it will be a very strong game for Shakir. So I am in total agreement with this. I also think that, James Cook, I know he didn't have a ton of yards on Monday night this last week. I think he's looked really good this year. The Ravens have been excellent against the run, so I could see them shutting him down, and maybe we do get more targets because Josh Allen will be forced to throw more, and especially if it's a high-scoring game. So I'm with you. I think it's a great matchup for him, in addition to the fact that he's looked really good this season already. So totally co-signing there. Erickson, who is your plant your flag player?
Going back to Rashid Shaheed. So 2 great weeks to open the year. Last week, goose egg, but still had 5 targets. And he had the opportunities to get big plays. He just didn't end up delivering. It's not going to happen every single week. You can't always expect to catch a long touchdown. But I think in this specific matchup, I think this is where you want to bounce back, because even last week, he still had over 100 air yards. He had 53% air yard share. These are the players that you want to buy low on heading into the following week. The Eagles aren't that zone-heavy matchup. With Rashid Shaheed, it's all about, does this defense play zone or does this defense play man? And when he plays zone coverage defenses like he did the first 2 weeks of the season, he goes off. And then when he plays more of a man defense like he played last week, it just doesn't happen. So looking at the Atlanta Falcons, so they're 12th in zone coverage per fantasy points data suite. And that's why I like him in here for a major bounce back. They rank top 5 in cover 3, and they're 31st in pressure rate. Through the first 2 weeks of the season, Derek Carr was on fire because operating from a clean pocket. When Derek Carr can stand there, go through his reads, and rip it downfield, that's when Rashid Shaheed has big games. And the Falcons, I don't know why it's been since like Jonathan Abraham that they haven't had a pass rush. That's how long it's been since the Falcons have been able to generate any type of pass rush, and that continues even today. They have Matthew Judon, but he's still not getting home with some of these rushes. So I really like Derek Carr and Shaheed to bounce back here, and that's why he's my flag plant.
Fitz, Shaheed burned some folks in week 3. What do you expect out of him in week 4?
I think Erickson is right to call the bounce back here. Not only is it a good setup with, as he points out, a team that plays a lot of zone and doesn't really get home with the pass rush, but it's just the Saints have the narrowest possible target tree. There are not a lot of branches on that tree. It's Chris Olave, it's Rashid Shaheed, it's Alvin Kamara. Basically, their number 3 receiver is Mason Tipton, who I think is a Yaley, an Ivy Leaguer. A lot of number 3 Ivy League receivers. Andre Yosevach. It's a trend in the NFL, I guess. They don't throw to their tight ends much. Yeah, I think this is a get right game for Shaheed. And by the way, there were a couple of near big plays for Shaheed last week. Like that 0 doesn't look good, but it could have been a lot better.
TD. Tutty, taking it to the house, in for 6. Whatever you call a touchdown, one thing's for sure, touchdowns matter more at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. On the ground, in the air, from the special teams or defense, we don't care how they score, and we just want to bet on touchdowns. And DraftKings Sportsbook is delivering. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking a player to score a touchdown or how many touchdowns will be in a game. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. There are a few stellar matchups in week 4, including Arizona-Washington, highest point total of the week, right at 50 points. Definitely expecting lots of touchdowns in that one. Plus, the primetime schedule is awesome. Ravens-Bills on Sunday Night Football. Ravens laying 2.5 points. Seahawks-Lions on Monday Night Football. Those Lions are laying 3.5 points. So those lines and odds are subject to change. Ready to do a touchdown dance of your own? New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the number 1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, guys, let's get into some of our player debates for the week. We will start off, as always, with the running backs. First debate here, Najee Harris versus Zach Moss. Erickson, let's start with you. What do you think about this one?
I think it's really close. And this one made me think a lot because I think that both guys are set up really well here. But for me, I slightly lean towards Najee Harris. I don't expect Jaylen Warren to play in this matchup. You have the number 1 most run-heavy offense going against the league's worst run defense. And I know Zach Moss probably plays in a better offense overall. The Bengals will probably score more points against the Carolina Panthers. But I feel like this opportunity for Najee Harris doesn't come very often. And if Warren's not playing, he should get 20, 25 carries in this game. He has the most red zone touches without a touchdown yet this season. Again, regression. I think he's going to find the end zone once, if not twice, in this matchup. So I slightly lean towards Najee.
Yeah, the ECR rankings, Najee's running back 22. This isn't half PPR, by the way. Zach Moss up at RB 18. Fitz, I'm curious what you make of that, since you have been very much on the Chase Brown is better than Zach Moss train, but Moss has just been the RB1 so far.
Chase Brown is better than Zach Moss, but I am still taking Zach Moss over Najee this week. So both of these guys have good matchups. I know the Colts' run defense has been bad, but so is the Panthers. Actually, both of those run defenses bounced back last week against bad running games after getting just trucked the first 2 weeks. The Colts were able to stop the Bears and their terrible offensive line, and the Panthers had a bounce back game against the Raiders. But I give the edge to Moss. The Jaylen Warren thing, not a factor. Arthur Smith is just going to give the ball to Cordero Patterson instead of Jaylen Warren. That doesn't make Najee any more attractive to me. And I'm concerned that Najee's offensive line is banged up. They won't have Nate Herbig. They're not going to have the rookie tackle Troy Fatanu. I don't know about Isaac Seumalo. I guess he returned to practice this week. Maybe he plays. That would be a help. But they both have these favorable matchups, and the Vegas total for Bengals Panthers is 47. The Vegas total for Steelers Colts is 40. That game seems like it's going to be a complete slog. Give me the guy in the higher scoring game with the healthier offensive line.
Do you have a prediction of when, if at all, we're going to see Chase Brown take over the backfield? Because it was something that and I agreed with you, I'm not putting it all on you, but that we would see this happen relatively early in the season, and it hasn't happened yet. Only been 3 weeks. Do you have a thought of when it might happen?
I think it goes to maybe closer to 50-50 before it becomes a takeover, but the Bengals are 0-3, so they are incentivized to start looking for things to change up, and maybe that's it, because again, we saw Chase Brown look pretty good on a limited number of touches on Monday night, 7 carries, 61 yards, so hopefully Chase Brown's role starts to take up soon.
I wonder if maybe we see it during or after week 5, because, coming up next week is that Ravens defense, which, Zach Moss is the type of running back that I think they can shut down pretty easily. So I wonder if maybe we see the Bengals change things up there, try and get a little more explosion in that backfield. What do you think, Erickson? How long do you expect the Zach Moss train to keep rolling?
I mean, looking back to last year, Alexander Mattison was the starting running back for the Vikings for a long time. I don't think these things happen overnight. So again, Chase Brown is sitting on your bench, but we see the explosiveness that he can offer. And I think Fitz did a great job, honestly, of Zach Moss over Najee. I think I'm actually going to change my answer. So you've convinced me, Fitz. So hopefully this convinces the listeners as well. But I'm going to move. They're still ranked back to back for me, and I still like Najee, but I can't deny, again, you're right about the Patterson thing. I think that's maybe something I overlooked with him probably just filling in the Jaylen Warren role, and both guys have a lot of touchdown upside.
And they're both firmly kind of in that second half of the RB2 range for most folks in consensus rankings. Let's go to another running back here. Chuba Hubbard versus Tony Pollard. Erickson, starting with you again.
I'm going to go with Hubbard here. I thought that he operated as a clear-cut bell cow for the Panthers, and he looked good. He's breaking tackles, catching passes. They have all the incentive to feed this guy as much as possible because they know they have Jonathan Brooks waiting in the wings to kind of take over that RB1 role down the stretch. So I think it makes sense to get the most out of Hubbard playing in a contract year. Whereas Tony Pollard, look, Tajay Spears came back and it's kind of back to a committee. They still want to have a committee, and Spears didn't seem like he was limited anyway by his ankle injury. So I think both matchups are pretty good, but anytime I can just continue to target this Bengals defense, which is horrible overall, horrible against the run, horrible against the pass, again, they're going to need to score points, and I'm not concerned about Chuba's going to be involved no matter what. And I know that he's the goal line back, so I'm going to ride Chuba Hubbard until he gets replaced.
Fitz?
Talk about a quarterback change, flipping the switch for an offense. Like the Panthers offense went from a 40-watt bulb to a sign on top of a Vegas hotel, 437 yards of offense against the Raiders last week. Chuba Hubbard's usage just glorious. 21 carries, 5 receptions. Granted, the Panthers... the Panthers did run a million plays against the Raiders because The Raiders D just couldn't get off the field last week. But did you guys see how the Bengals defense played on Monday night? That's not a great defense either by any stretch. I think it's a bottom 10 D. I'm not necessarily worried that Tony Pollard laid an egg against the Packers last week, that the Titans just didn't get the ground game going. The game script went sideways for them from the start, and they had to abandon the run. So Pollard, Pollard also bottom 10 defense. He plays Miami. So great matchups for both, but I'm just rolling with Hubbard. I have more faith in that offense than I have more faith in Andy Dalton than in Will Levis.
Erickson, what are your kind of overall thoughts on Pollard? He has gotten worse each week so far this season. He had 16 for 82 and a touchdown in week 1, 17 for 62, no touchdown in week 2, and then just 6 for 14 in week 3, obviously. Some involvement in the passing game as well. But what do you make of him kind of rest of the season?
I like him a lot. I think that he's an interesting buy low candidate. He's passing the eye test for me. He looks explosive, which is the main reason we like Tony Pollard. Again, I think the Titans offense is still kind of going through its growing pains. That's what happens when Will Levis is your quarterback. So I do think it's going to be like the Will Levis experience, a lot of ups and downs, but I do think Pollard is the favorite in that backfield. Again, Spears is always going to kind of be involved, but Pollard has a 3-down skill set. And if this offense starts to click a little bit more, Levis has had his moments as a thrower, but it's obviously been, with the interceptions and the turnovers, that's the only thing people really care about, even though he's made a lot of really nice throws as well. So I still like Pollard the rest of season, and I think he's an interesting buy low target.
Let's look at some wide receivers here. Fitz, I'll start with you. Stefon Diggs versus Amari Cooper. What do you make of this one?
Good matchups for both. Diggs against the Jaguars, Cooper against the Raiders. But how can you not go with the Amari Cooper revenge game narrative against his old team, the Raiders? I'm sure he is still steaming over having to share targets with Michael Crabtree 8 years ago. But seriously, Cooper.
Wow.
But seriously, Cooper did have a rough first couple of weeks. Had a lot of off-target throws, had some really unsightly drops, but got right last week against the Giants. 7 catches, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns. The Raiders cornerbacks just aren't very good. This is a fantastic matchup for him. I realize Diggs plays with the far better quarterback in C.J. Stroud versus Cooper with Deshaun Watson, but the Texans have an ensemble cast of pass catchers, whereas Cooper's clearly the number one receiver for the Browns.
Yeah, Diggs, that game was so out of hand early, the Houston-Minnesota game, that, kind of gets, a little less attention, during the Sunday afternoon action. And, Diggs had 12 targets, 10 receptions, 94 yards. I was kind of surprised when I went and looked back and saw the kind of game he got. Obviously he didn't get, in the end zone, but, a lot of usage in that game. Erickson, who do you like better this week, Amari Cooper or Stefon Diggs? Because I will say personally, I know Cooper had kind of that get right game last week. I just don't trust Deshaun Watson enough to do it a second week in a row. He just looks so terrible that it's really hard for me to go back to well on any of these Browns players.
Well, as I alluded to everyone, when people were asking me if they should trade away Amari Cooper, I said, guys, this is the roller coaster experience. He's going to have big games and horrible games all year long, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. It could be Deshaun Watson at quarterback. It could be Jameis Winston. It could be me at quarterback, and it doesn't matter. He's just going to find ways to have 30-point games and find ways to have 0-point games. It's just what Amari Cooper does. So I do think it is a good matchup for him as well against the Raiders, but I just think that the Texans are in for a bounce back with their offense. I don't know if there's a bigger stark difference when it comes to playing that Vikings defense that puts the clamps on every offense it faces than facing the Jaguars. The Jaguars defense is so bad, and they are a pass funnel, right? They are good against the run. The Texans will take that all day, and they'll just rip it up with their 3 receivers. So I'll take my chances betting on, okay, maybe Diggs, it's his week again. He's been the guy that's been scoring a lot of the touchdowns. Again, you talked about how many targets he got last week, so I feel good about that. Tank Dell's dealing with a wrist injury, so he's a little bit banged up. So I think Diggs, again, he's got to get warmed up for his revenge game coming up soon. So I like Stefon Diggs over Amari Cooper this week.
Is Diggs kind of, obviously you're ranking Nico Collins ahead of both those guys, but is Diggs kind of the guy that you expect to maybe outperform his ranking the most this week of that trio of receivers? Or are you thinking it's still just kind of going to be Collins as an alpha and then one of Diggs or Dell? Do you think this is the Dell week finally? I know you mentioned kind of banged up there. What do you kind of make of the 3 of them against each other?
I mean, I think it's just kind of how we've seen it. It's been Nico at the top, Diggs number 2, and Tank Dell. Again, we're still kind of waiting for it to happen. I think eventually it will, and this could be the matchup where it does, but got to make sure he's healthy. And right now, it looks like he is playing a little bit banged up, and that means more opportunities for Stefon Diggs. Again, this is how you attack this Jaguars defense, is you just rip it. And we saw they couldn't run the ball without Joe Mixon. Didn't know that he was going to make that big of a difference. So shout out to Terry Bradshaw on the Fox broadcast for saying that he took the Vikings because the Texans didn't have Joe Mixon, which I didn't agree with that analysis, but he ended up being spot on with it. So shout out to the Steelers quarterback. But yeah, I just think the matchup is too good to pass up with this horrible Jaguars secondary.
Let's do another wide receiver debate, and we're sticking with this Panthers-Bengals game. Diontae Johnson versus T. Higgins. Obviously, Johnson's outlook looks a whole lot different with Andy Dalton, given what we just saw last week, both out of Dalton and out of Diontae himself, compared to what it was with Bryce Young. T. Higgins, kind of still working his way back. Obviously, a very talented player. Fitz, Higgins, or Diontae Johnson? Who do you like better in week 4?
I guess I'm all in on the Panthers. Green light for Chuba Hubbard, green light for Diontae Johnson. It could be a target smorgasbord for Diontae Johnson this week. Adam Thielen, he's out for a while. They don't throw to their tight ends. Their other receivers, Jonathan Mingo and Xavier Legette, not established. So this could be a heavy target game for Diontae Johnson, who's coming off a 14-target game last week. Higgins, again, maybe it's kind of the same situation we're seeing with Brandon Ayuk. Like Higgins just hasn't been playing a lot of football lately with his hamstring injury. So first game of the season for him after missing the first 2 last week, and he looked rusty. 3 catches for 39 yards, should have had a easy touchdown to at least salvage his day for fantasy, and just reacted really slowly to a ball thrown into the end zone where he just kind of started his jump late, just didn't react to the ball very quickly. This one's an easy call. Do better, Worm. Diontae Johnson.
Erickson, what do you think?
Yeah, do better, Worm. It's obviously Diontae Johnson. I think for me, it's Diontae Johnson and T. Higgins. I think they both have really high ceilings, but Diontae also has a really high floor because we know he's going to get the target volume. And last week, he could have had 3 touchdowns, right? Diontae had a great week last week despite leaving production on the table. So now that there is no other player in this offense without Adam Thielen, Diontae is going to get double-digit targets, locked and loaded. So even if he finishes 6 for 60, that's a much higher floor than with T. Higgins, where this was T. Higgins last year too. It was really high highs and really low lows, like we saw last week, where he didn't end up converting on those high-value opportunities. So could he have a big week this week? Yeah. I think he could, because we know the the Panthers defense really can't stop anybody, just like the Bengals. So it should be a high scoring game, but Diontae just comes with such a safer floor. And I think that the ceiling is just as high. So yeah, it's Diontae for me as well.
As of last night, when I was putting together this outline, one of you had Higgins actually slightly ahead of Diontae Johnson. So it's totally fine that that's changed. You don't need to stick to that just because of how you felt earlier in the week, but it wasn't some unreasonable debate to be thrown out there. Diontae has gone up in, overnight in our expert consensus rankings as well, with folks from across the industry. So it looks a little more, disparate now, but those guys were pretty close here early on in the week. I also agree, for the record, that Diontae Johnson is the guy I would prefer to be started.
How about we do Diontae versus our flag plants and Jauan Jennings? 3 guys we already talked about. So I guess I can start because I'm the one that posed the question. I'm probably going to take Diontae over both those guys, over Jennings and Shaheed. I don't know if you agree, Fitz.
I would agree with that, for the record. Yeah, Fitz, what do you think?
Okay.
I do. Maybe earlier in the week, I might have had Jennings ranked higher, but now that it looks like George Kittle is going to be back, I would start Diontae over all those guys.
Okay. What about Shakir?
I'd start him over Shakir too.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see, because obviously it's a bad defense he's going up against, and we're coming off such a great game. I'm curious to see where Diontae, for as long as Andy Dalton is the quarterback, I'm curious to see where he kind of settles into the weekly rankings. Not even necessarily trying to project his rest of season ranking right now, but just on a week-to-week basis when Andy Dalton is starting, where he's going to be falling in, let's say against an average defense. Do you have a sense, Fitz, of where Diontae Johnson will kind of end up?
I think probably low-end wide receiver 2 range, in the low 20s, 21 to 24.
Erickson, kind of the same range for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, his bugaboo has always been the guy can't score touchdowns, right? That's always kind of been his thing, and that is going to really pivot. Okay, if he's a low-end wide receiver 1, it's because he's scoring a bunch of touchdowns versus him being a PPR machine, which kind of puts him more in that wide receiver 3 range. So I think, wide receiver 2 is going to be where he settles, and it's going to be ultimately, does he find the end zone or not? And I mean, this week in particular against the Bengals, does everyone have a revenge game this week? It just seems like it's revenge fest. You got Andy Dalton against the Bengals. maybe I need to do a thread about these revenge games because there's too many to account for. The people need to know.
I was going to say, go write an article.
Plain Mayor, I got a great idea.
Yeah.
Revenge games.
Well, so they say this then before I move off, because I don't want to give short shrift to Higgins, just in case people are trying to make decisions on him, even if it's not against Diontae Johnson. If you had to make the case for Higgins over somebody like Johnson or Jennings or Shakir or whoever in this range, playing devil's advocate, what would the case be for Higgins this week, Erickson?
That the Bengals offense need to score a ton of points because their defense can't stop anybody. So for me, it's if Diontae Johnson is having a good game, then that means T. Higgins might have a good game as well. I think that he's in that wide receiver 3 boom or bust type of territory. You could see the ceiling with him, or you could see the floor, where last week that's what ended up happening. And the hamstring injury coming off of that is always a concerning thing too, because what if he repulls it? What if he re-aggravates it? So again, if you have a receiver that you're playing, maybe, I think I'd rather play Higgins than Xavier Worthy. I haven't seen anything the last 2 weeks that suggests that, the Chiefs are suddenly going to start just launching balls down the field against the Chargers. So I don't see the ceiling there, but that's the case, I think, for Higgins. Hey, I need to shoot for upside. That would be Higgins for me.
Fitz, obviously it's not ranked this way. They're very far apart with Higgins much higher, but would you, just given what we've seen, have any interest in maybe leaning towards Yoshivas over Higgins? I mean, he's, again, there's the injury kind of element with Higgins working his way back, but Yoshivas has been more productive.
He has been. I still have to go with Higgins in the more established track record, but maybe Yoshivas is playable. I mean, Erickson mentioned it, the Bengals defense is so bad. This could be just a series of OK Corral type game scripts for the Bengals, where they have to just keep the gas pedal down on the offense, playing catch up. So yeah, a lot of shootouts. It's Joe Burrow with the Wyatt Earp gang versus the Clantons every week.
I was going to ask Erickson if he understood the OK Corral reference. Have you seen Tombstone, Erickson?
No, I thought you were tying in Matt Corral or something.
Oh,
That's he used to be on the Panthers, I think.
Okay. Well, I have seen Tombstone, Fitz, for the record. So
classic, great movie, Erickson.
That's my list.
That's a hole in your movie watching resume.
My buddy had a bachelor party several years ago out in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and we went to, they had the gravesite of Val Kilmer's character. I'm just blanking on the name right
Doc
now.
Holliday.
Yes, Doc Holliday. They have kind of the gravesite, and people will leave shot glasses of whiskey or bullets or whatever at the gravesite. So we hiked up to see that. It was pretty cool. Yeah, excellent movie. Strong recommend.
The pinnacle of Val Kilmer's acting career, without a doubt.
I totally agree. A lot of testosterone in that movie, but guys, low testosterone affects about 30% of adult men in America. Are you feeling the drag of fatigue, noticing a dip in muscle mass, or sensing a slump in libido? If so, it's time to get your testosterone levels tested. If you have low T, Kysotrex is an FDA-approved pill that's changing the game in testosterone replacement therapy. In fact, Kysotrex restored testosterone levels in nearly 9 out of 10 clinical study participants, and its unique formulation bypasses the liver to avoid liver damage. It's time to break free from injections, pellets, and gels. Choose Kysotrex and take a step toward being the hero of your life. Again, to learn more, visit Kysotrex.com. That's KYZATREX.com. By prescription only, Kysotrex is a controlled substance and can be a target of abuse. Kysotrex is not for use in pregnant women or men with prostate or breast cancer. Safety and efficacy in those younger than 18 is not known. Tell your doctor about all medical conditions and medications. Serious side effects could include increased blood pressure, worsening prostate symptoms, increased risk of prostate cancer, blood clots in the legs or lungs, decreased sperm count, liver problems, enlarged or painful breasts, and breathing problems while you sleep. Common side effects include swelling of the ankles, feet, or body, increased red blood cell count, and increase in prostate-specific antigen or PSA levels. PSA is a test used to detect prostate cancer. Report these symptoms to your doctor. Call your doctor to learn more about Kaisertrex. For questions or more information, visit www.kaisertrex.com or call 1-833-949-5050. All right, guys, let's get into some rapid fire start sit decisions. Let's do another running back here. A couple of guys in the same backfield. This is an ugly one, but I wanted to include it. Alexander Mattison versus Zamir White. Fitz, you said if Zamir White didn't do it last week that we were going to give up on him. Are you sticking to that?
Yes. I mean, I don't want either of these guys in my lineup. I have Zamir ranked higher, but higher is relative. He's running back 35, so I don't want to play him.
That is in the range, though, where he might, depending on your team, if you've taken on some injuries, you might need to be starting him kind of in that flex spot. Erickson, what do you think, Mattison versus White, if you're in a bind?
Madison's outscored Zamir White every single week this year. I can't. They take Zamir White out at the goal line. I don't see where his value is coming in any way. So I'm going to start Mattison.
Yeah, that one. Hopefully you have another option to not start either of those guys. Let's get a couple of more intriguing options here for another wide receiver debate. Khalil Shakir, who is, Fitz is going all in on. So we'll start with you, Fitz, to see what you think, versus Jayden Reed, your boy on the Packers.
My initial rankings, I had Khalil Shakir ranked one spot higher, but then I did a rethink on that and I moved Jayden Reed higher. I'm a little concerned about Jordan Love going against this Vikings defense that's been really good. I feel like Matt LaFleur is maybe going to go a little run heavy to try to protect Love against this Vikings pass rush, which has been terrific. I mean, with Brian Flores bringing all this pressure in unexpected ways. But in Jayden Reed's 17 games with Jordan Love, 17 regular season games, he scored 12 touchdowns. And Matt LaFleur is always scheming ways to get the ball into Jayden Reed's hands. So he also, I think, has the best matchup of any of the Packer receivers going up against Byron Murphy this week. So I do have to go with Reed over Shakir.
Erickson, you've been kind of the Jayden Reed guy since week one. Are you going with that here too?
Yep. I think that the matchup calls for, hey, if this Vikings defense is going to be bringing the heat, bringing the blitz, who's my quick outlet? It's Jayden Reed in the slot. That's Jordan Love's guy. You look at in these two match again, these teams faced each other last year. Brian Flores was the defense coordinator for the Vikings last year. Jayden Reed had averaged over 80 receiving yards in both games against the Minnesota Vikings. So I think that this is, again, if you got to pick a Packers receiver to have a big game, it's going to be Jayden Reed for me.
Let's talk some flex debates here. How about George Pickens versus J.K. Dobbins? Erickson, what do you think about this one?
I think that Pickens is going to have a massive game at some point this year. I just don't think it's going to be against the Colts because the Steelers don't need to push the envelope, right? They don't need Justin Fields to be dropping back and throwing deep passes to George Pickens to win this game. So until we see the Steelers play in a script that actually calls for George Pickens to be targeted more aggressively, I think that he's going to fall kind of in that wide receiver 3 territory for me. But Dobbins, I think he's going to get 20, 25 touches in this game because how else are the Chargers supposed to win? Again, they're dealing with the tackle issues. So how do you combat that? Not by dropping back to throw 40 times a game with backup tackles, is you establish the run with your interior. And I think that's what Harbaugh wants to do. And Dobbins is his guy. So I'm going to bet on Dobbins. I know last week he didn't put up the production, but I still thought he looked really good. And if he just breaks one play, he's going to get all your fantasy points in one single run. And I think that he can potentially do that against the Chiefs. So I'm going to go with Dobbins.
What do you think, Fitz?
I could not possibly disagree with Erickson more on this one. We're talking about a guy making his day with one play, and you're taking J.K. Dobbins over George Pickens. And I think Pickens could have the big game. Like the Colts outside cornerbacks are terrible, and Pickens has a 25% target share. So I don't see any reason why this couldn't be the big game for Pickens. Dobbins, good luck establishing that run when you've got Joe Alt-Delete and Rashawn Slater both out of the game. It's not going to be a run-friendly game script, most likely against the Chiefs, with the Chargers as huge underdogs. Justin Herbert's going to be gutting it out with a high ankle sprain. That's not going to be pretty. I am really nervous about Dobbins this week, and I am looking at other options.
These two are actually, they're back to back in our staff rankings with you two and Debro. And the main reason for that, Debro has them pretty close together, is that Erickson is much higher on Dobbins and Fitz is much higher on Pickens of the two this week. So they ultimately end up evened out, but you guys definitely agree or disagree on just how close they actually are. Where do you have Dobbins ranked, Fitz, by the way?
It's like running back 23, I think. But like that reflects probably more confidence than I actually have in the situation.
Okay.
So it's funny that you say that because I have him already 25, right?
So, really?
So yeah. So it's funny that, we have our perceptions of how we feel about the players. And then when you actually put them in the rankings, it's like, oh, well, maybe I'm not as high on J.K. Dobbins as I appear to be coming off. I'm a fraud, apparently, is what I'm saying here.
Well, Erickson, where do you have Pickens ranked?
In receivers, I think I have him in the wide receiver 35.
Okay.
So,
geez,
a little bit lower down.
I've got him wide receiver 21.
Okay.
Yeah.
So actual disagreement there.
So it's more that it's really more about Pickens and not Dobbins.
Yeah.
Really. It's more about you're just really high on Pickens. So, okay.
I think so.
Let's look at another flex here. Carson Steele versus Jackson Smith-Njigba. This would be shocking to me that this would even be a question if you asked me this 3 weeks ago. Erickson, what do you think? Carson Steele or JSN?
I think I'm shooting for ceiling. I think I'm going to go with Jackson Smith-Njigba. Again, it should be a potential shootout against the Detroit Lions playing the Seattle Seahawks. You've seen Detroit give it up to a lot of slot receivers. Cooper Kupp, Chris Godwin the first 2 weeks. I know Greg Dortch didn't have a massive game, but we still saw a decent amount of targets in that matchup. So I think that JSN, look, you got the week 2 eruption and you've had 2 duds in between. Again, it's going to be inconsistent with him, I think, while there's these other mouths to feed in the Seahawks offense. But we know that the Seahawks are, without Ken Walker, they're ready to dial up the pass. And against the Lions, we know that the Lions are going to put up points because the Seahawks have not been tested on defense yet this season. So I think that their defense is going to give up a lot of points. I think it's going to force Geno to a very heavy pass game script, and that really helps JSN. Whereas Carson Steele, I think that he is the guy, but Kareem Hunt's going to be active, and that concerns me if they're going to do some weird things around the goal line. So that's my only reservation. Again, felt better about Steele last week because there was no Kareem Hunt. Again, I still think that it's going to be Steele at the goal line, but would I be super surprised if we look up and it's like, oh, they're doing this Kareem Hunt thing again? That would be frustrating, but I don't want to just totally ignore that possibility. So I will go with JSN in the plus matchup.
Fitz, who do you prefer?
I thought about this one for quite a while. I'm going to go with Steele. I will not violently oppose Erickson's call on this one like I did with the Pickens versus Dobbins thing. But like the thing is, I can't get a handle on the usage of JSN with the target counts the first 3 weeks, 3, 16, 2. And I do know the Lions have this pass funnel defense, and this could be a shootout, and that would all set up pretty well for JSN. But I could be wrong about this. I don't think Kareem Hunt affects the Carson Steele usage at all. Like, Kareem Hunt looked bad last year, and I thought Steele looked okay. Like, he gave them the early down rushing threat and sort of keeping just keeping them out of like long down and distance situations. I think that's kind of all they want, and someone who can maybe plow it in for touchdowns. And Steele did get 2 cracks from the 2-yard line last year, including 1 out of the Wildcat formation. So 17 carries last week. I think this is going to be a really run-friendly game script against the beaten-up Chargers. So, yeah. And by the way, I like Steele for an anytime touchdown on DraftKings at plus 135 this week. So I'm going with the man of Steele, going into the phone booth and coming out as Superman in this game.
Good nugget there on the anytime touchdown, too. Let's look at another flex here. Rachaad White versus Rome Odunze. Fitz, who do you like here?
I'll go with White. I mean, maybe we get a changing of the guard soon with Bucky Irving, but last week the snap split was still 42-18 in White's favor. He is still going to be used in the passing game, even if he loses work on early downs. And Keenan Allen is coming back for the Bears. Rome's big game was fueled by the Bears being in this crazy catch-up mode and more than 50 pass attempts for Caleb Williams. We can't count on that, so I just don't know what the target share looks like for Rome with Keenan Allen back.
Erickson, who do you prefer between White and Odunze?
I think I'm going to take the upside play with Rome. And I recognize he probably doesn't have as safe a floor as Rachaad White does as a, starting running back who's going to catch passes. But this Rams defense, we just saw what Jauan Jennings did to them. Like, it's such a bad defense. They don't have anybody. They lost Raheem Morris, and we're seeing that the no-name defense is now coming up with the amount of points that you can put on them in the run and in the passing game. So, no, Caleb Williams is not going to drop back to throw 52 times. But is he going to throw 35 times? Probably, because we know that the Bears can't run the football. And they're not going to be able to run the football anyway. So I think that's still going to pass a decent amount in this matchup. Caleb and Rome have had a good connection dating back to the preseason. So again, Keenan Allen's missed a bunch of time. If he's playing, is he 100% healthy? Don't know what to expect. Again, he was really good in week 1 from a target share perspective, but then he got hurt. So we'll see how that kind of affects things. I just really like the matchup here. So again, I recognize that White does have the safer floor, but in this great matchup, again, Odunze is a really good player. Top 10 overall draft pick, broke out last week, and he left a lot of production on the table. So I think Caleb's going to look his way a lot, and I just like his upside.
How about Darnell Mooney versus DeAndre Swift, Erickson?
I'm playing Darnell Mooney. I don't want any part of DeAndre Swift because we could look up and it could be Roschon Johnson leading that backfield. Again, talked about how Zamir White, it was, hey, this is your make or break game. It was the same thing for Swift last week against the Colts, and he did absolutely nothing. He had negative rushing yards in the red zone. So for me, the Bears need to take a long look in the mirror and say, is DeAndre Swift as our leading running back the best way for us to move the ball? I think the answer, at least for the first 3 weeks, is no. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see his snaps reduce significantly. Again, he's not used at the red zone. He's not rushing efficiently. And Caleb Williams, why would he be throwing the ball at Swift when he could throw to all his great receivers and Cole Kmet? So I just don't see where there is any value with Swift. So you could have probably put anybody else here versus Swift, and I probably would have just picked the other guys. So by default, Darnell Mooney wins.
It's an interesting one in our expert consensus rankings because Swift is higher by a few spots in our flex rankings, but when you actually look to see like how many experts are picking one versus the other, more experts have Mooney higher. It's just the gap is wider for the experts who have Swift higher. So that makes him higher in the overall rankings. Fitz, I'm curious who you like better between Swift and Mooney.
I actually did consider this a close call, but then shortly before we recorded, I saw a report by Jeremy Fowler that the Bears might be giving more work to Roschon Johnson this week. And Jeremy Fowler is a good reporter. Like, he is getting that information from someone inside the Bears organization. So, yeah, it's time to bench DeAndre Swift. And good luck to Roschon Johnson, because I don't think any Bears running back is going to succeed with the way that offensive line is playing.
Yeah. Seriously. All right, let's look at a quarterback here. This is one that I never would have guessed I would have asked before the season, but given the way the start of the season has gone, I feel like it's warranted, and there might be people out there making maybe not this exact decision, but similar decisions. Anthony Richardson versus Derek Carr. Fitz, what do you think about this one?
I'm going out on a limb here. I've still got Anthony Richardson ranked as a top 12 quarterback this week. And when a quarterback has the sort of rushing upside that Anthony Richardson has, it is going to take a lot to shake my faith in him. I am not yet to the point where I could bench Anthony Richardson for Derek Carr, who showed us last week after fooling us for 2 weeks that he is the same mid-range to low-end quarterback too that he's always been. Like, that is where he is on the food chain at quarterback and where he remains. I know that Anthony Richardson's completion percentage is 49.3%. I know his matchup with the Steelers looks terrible on paper, but I also know that Anthony Richardson is capable of running for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns and making us feel silly for even thinking about benching him. And look, as bad as the Colts passing game has been, he's averaging 8 yards per attempt. That's 6th among quarterbacks right now. That's ahead of Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Matthew Stafford, because they still hit on some big plays in the passing game. So with that chance for big plays on top of the rushing yardage, I'm going with Richardson here.
Erickson, what do you think? The rushing yardage, obviously we know it could be there. It hasn't been there the last 2 weeks, 37 yards and 24 yards each of the last 2 weeks. And obviously 1 touchdown, 5 interceptions across the last 2 weeks as well. Tough matchup. How are you ranking Richardson relative to Carr?
I feel safer with Carr. And I guess for me, it's like I'm willing to pass up, and maybe this is wrong, but again, Richardson last week, he was close to scoring rushing touchdowns, so he wasn't that far off of saving your day. But that's the risk you take where, well, they give it to Jonathan Taylor or they give it to Trey Sermon, and that's the guy who scores, and that kills you. If it wasn't the Steelers, I think I'd feel better about going back to Richardson, but I'm just trying to project this game in my mind. How are the Steelers, how are the Colts going to run a bunch of plays in this game? Aren't the Steelers just going to play bully ball and just run the football with all their guys against the Colts defense that can't stop the run? So I'm just concerned about, well, can the Colts get in any type of rhythm? Are they going to be able to run the football? So I acknowledge that I think Richardson is going to bounce back. I just can't see it this week. So for me, I'm just going to take the safe guy. I mean, I talked about Carr earlier with Rashid Shaheed. I think we see more of what we saw at weeks 1 through 2 with Derek Carr versus what we saw last week, because I just don't think the Falcons can generate any type of pass rush. So I'm going to take the safe route here and take Derek Carr. So my final last words.
Let's look at a tight end here too. And again, this is another one where before the season, I never would have thought I would put these two head to head. Mark Andrews versus Pat Freiermuth. Fitz, what do you think about this one?
I'm going to go with Freiermuth. I've got Freiermuth tight end 9 and Andrews tight end 11. Freiermuth has had 4 catches in every game this season. Hasn't scored a touchdown and hasn't gotten to 40 yards yet. So it's not like he's doing much with those receptions, but at least gives him a safe
something.
Yeah, it gives him a safe floor. I don't know what's going on with Mark Andrews. It's possible he's not 100% physically. He had tightrope surgery after his foot injury last season, and maybe it's affecting him the same way it affected Tony Pollard for much of last season, where like he just clearly wasn't the same guy for a while. And he also had that car crash during August where he actually missed some time in training camp. He came back and told reporters his body felt good, but like, who knows? So plus you've got that George Kittle thing going on with Andrews, where some weeks he's just not in the game plan as a route runner. He's doing too much pass blocking. It's only been 3 weeks, and it's possible we'll get the Mark Andrews game, the sort of Mark Andrews game we're used to seeing from him. And that'll sort of allay our fears with Mark Andrews. But for now, I'm taking the safer route, I think, with Freiermuth.
Yeah, it's only been 3 weeks, and 2 of the weeks were kind of interesting. You know, we've talked a lot about how the Ravens kind of treat Chiefs games differently. Obviously, Likely was the guy who was just open a lot in that game, and they were using Andrews to help block. It was his first game back from, there was the car crash, like you said, and all that stuff. And then in last week, in week 3, they didn't throw because they didn't need to, because they could just run all over the Cowboys. So, the only game that was quote unquote normal, and still, included a fourth quarter collapse, was that one against the Raiders. And in that game, he had the second most receiving yards on the team, just 5 targets, but 4 catches for 51 yards. So if he gets a touchdown in that game, we're looking at this as 1 good game and 2 bad ones. He just happened to not get a touchdown on that one. I kind of think that the biggest concern for me with Andrews is that I think you need to rely on him in the red zone. And I think that they're going to use Derrick Henry so much in the red zone that might just eat into the opportunities more than I really projected before the season started. And I projected a lot of touchdown opportunities for Henry, but I wasn't thinking about how much that might take away from Andrews. Eric, I'm curious who you like better between these two, and specifically with Andrews, what your thoughts are overall from what we've seen.
Yeah, not been good. Not been good from Mark Andrews, to say it lightly. For me, again, going back to the weird game scripts that the Ravens have played in, last week, Lamar Jackson attempted the least amount of passes he's ever had in an NFL start for his entire NFL career. So holding that against Mark Andrews because he only ran 6 routes, because Lamar Jackson attempted the fewest amount of pass attempts he's ever played in a game in his entire NFL career. So that's an outlier. And then going back to week 1, the Chiefs, another really weird outlier game. And then you said in between, okay, an okay game. So I think we're more likely to get his week 2 performance at least in week 4. And I think that at least matches what Freiermuth has done so far this season, which is, again, 4 catches, under 40 yards. That's fine. Maybe he scores, maybe he doesn't. But with Andrews, this is a matchup where I think he will be more involved. Look at who's beaten the Bills. It's tight ends. Tight ends have been the thing because the Bills don't give up big plays. They're trying to keep everything in front of them. What does that mean? The middle of the field is wide open. That's Mark Andrews' bread and butter. So if Mark Andrews is ever going to break out of this slump, it has to be this week against the Bills, where it's a game where you could look up, Ravens are down 14-0. They can't just feed the ball to Derrick Henry. That's no longer an option because Josh Allen is scoring at will. You have to rev up the passing game. So again, and if it's not Andrews, then it's likely. So I do expect one of these tight ends to bounce back, and ultimately that will be the guy that I think, hey, after week 4, we're going to know who the Ravens tight end to own is rest of season, whether it's likely or Andrews. I think we're going to find out in week 4, but I think both of them are good starts in this week.
To that point in ECR, Mark Andrews is tight end 7. Pat Freiermuth is tight end 9. The guy in between them at tight end 8 is Isaiah Likely. So they are back to back, and the experts are saying that both these guys are top 8 options. Part of that is the state of the position, but the other part of that is kind of the matchup. I think the Bills' defense is kind of banged up in the middle as well, so maybe it presents even more of an opportunity. Fitz, you went with Freiermuth over Andrews. Would you go with Freiermuth over Likely as well?
I would.
Okay. So do you have Likely behind Andrews?
No, I've got him one spot.
Okay.
I've got him in between Freiermuth and Andrews.
Okay.
So it's your fault.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, we'll say goodbye to start-sit dilemmas with FantasyPros start-sit assistant. Within seconds, you'll know exactly who to play for optimal results each and every week. Leveraging insights from numerous experts, the start-sit assistant aligns your lineup decisions with the top minds in fantasy football, giving you a competitive edge. Maximize your lineup's potential with just a few clicks. Head to fantasypros.com/myplaybook and make winning decisions in no time. Guys, let's wrap up with our touchdown calls contest. We are back to what it was in week 1 with Erickson picking the running back, Fitz picking the wide receiver, and myself picking the tight end. I forgot to write down how we did last week. I know I at least did not hit mine last week. I actually don't know if any of us hit ours last week. It was not a strong touchdown.
Guess we'll never know.
We could easily go back and look it up, but let's not do that because I think the news would be bad. Erickson, start us off with the running back.
Well, I can't take Zach Moss because I already took Zach Moss this year, and I was right about it in week 1. So I'm going to go Najee Harris, the other running back we talked earlier in the show. He's going to find the end zone against the Indianapolis Colts.
Fitz, who do you like at wide receiver?
I don't necessarily like repeating picks for him, but you whiffed on Brandon Ayuk at wide receiver last week. I'm going to go right back to the well with Ayuk. I don't know if we can call this a squeaky wheel game, since the 49ers drove the Brinks truck up to Ayuk's house a couple of weeks ago and gave him millions of dollars. But a little axle grease couldn't hurt after the slow start for Ayuk.
I think you whiffed too last week, Fitz. Didn't you take Zamir White, now that I'm thinking about it, because he was facing the Panthers?
I took Zamir White.
Oh,
yes.
Well, I guess while we're all being honest, I took Mark Andrews. So there you go.
Ooh, that was a rough week.
Yeah, not our best. We're going to bounce back here. So Erickson is Najee Harris. Fitz is Brandon Ayuk. I will take Brock Bowers at tight end. I took Trey McBride. The first week I picked tight end. Didn't work out. I'm going to go with another young stud, the guy who's been, Bowers has been awesome this season. So I'm going to say he gets into the end zone for the first time this week in week 4. All right, so Najee Harris, Brandon Ayuk, and Brock Bowers. We'll get out of here on that one. For Erickson and Fitz, I'm Ryan Wormeli. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you again next time.